Welcome to week 2 in the Introduction to Social Welfare course. This week we're going to be focusing upon the first 3 chapters in the Day-Schiele text, A New History of Social Welfare. Some of the key concepts for this course are in the first couple of chapters in this textbook. I just think that these are really foundation concepts that you'll need to have in order to really grasp some of the significance of the material as the semester goes along. As a result of that, particularly chapter 1 is probably going to be a bit longer lecture than the other 2 chapters because I really don't want to rush through this for you, but I want to be able to spend the time that the concepts need. So with that in mind, in the day text, she talks in the first chapter about American values, and we're going to spend some time looking at that. First of all, social welfare, just as a basic concept, is really something that has 2 major purposes in any society. And the one we know about, the one we think about when we think about social welfare, is the social treatment aspect. That is, that the programs are supposed to have a helping aspect to it that aids individuals in need to meet their basic needs and to live a quality life, so to speak. But there is another element that perhaps isn't as obvious and isn't necessarily something that we want to identify as being designed into the social welfare system, but very definitely is, and that's social control. And that is the regulation of the behavior of the individuals who receive benefits through the social welfare system. So keep in mind that social welfare really has 2 major purposes: social treatment and social control. Naomi Brill, who has written several or different textbooks at least about social work and helping clients, was quoted in the day text as saying that the human service worker is a walking value system, that human service workers must be aware of those values, evaluate them rationally, and change the irrational ones. It's very important as we go about the business of working with individuals and helping people in the human services and the social work professions, that we recognize and understand that our values provide a filter through which we view the world and through which we have developed our own belief systems and our own attitudes about things. It's very, very critical that we know what our values are, because our values may not match the values of our clients, and we have to evaluate our values very carefully and very rationally, something probably we can't really do by ourselves, and then change those values that are irrational. In the social work and human services profession as well, we need to be aware of our values, because our values can affect how we work with other people, how we view them, and how we treat them, and it's very important that we not impose our values on others or let it impact our work with other people. We'll be dealing with that more later in the semester, and you will deal with it in other classes as well. But just this is one way, at least, where we begin to look at the values that we have as Americans. And certainly they play themselves out in the social welfare system in our society. Our social welfare programs really are set in place to redistribute resources in our society from the haves to the have-not, and this is a philosophy that is very contradictory to a lot of American values that we'll be looking at here this week. The basis of the economic system really in our society is the profit motive, and so the notion of taking some of an individual's profits there and giving it, redistributing to people who aren't succeeding, runs counter to the basic capitalism, basic economic system, and the philosophies of that. Generally our values in the economic system have this sort of hands-off attitude that believes that if an individual works hard, he'll succeed, and so therefore you shouldn't mess with him and take his money away to help others who aren't succeeding. That's sort of the undercurrent that is, I think, pretty evident in our society. And so social welfare programming really runs counter to that belief system. One thing for you that I would like for you to do is to take a moment and just consider what are your own values, and what are the things that you hold dear and that you believe in most strongly. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is to take a moment, stop this lecture presentation and write down 3 personal value statements that represent your beliefs. This is something obviously you're going to do just for yourself, but I would like for you to take a moment to do that and before you proceed with this lecture. So stop the video, write down your value statements, and then come back and continue the video. Phyllis Day writes about 9 different social values in America, and as you consider these values and we talk about them, think about how the 3 personal value statements that you wrote down fit into these values. The odds are you will find that most, if not all of those values, those personal value statements, are included in these 9 American social values. These are values that Day and Schiele indicate are common among Americans, and whether we consciously subscribe to them or not, tend to drive the way that we interact with others and the way we view the world. And we're going to go through each one of these. I want you to understand that understanding these 9 American values is one of those key things that I think in this course is very important. So please make a note of these things, maybe copy this slide and keep it handy, because as you look at what we do in our social welfare system in this nation in the weeks ahead, how we view welfare recipients and how we formulate our policies, how our politicians formulate our policies, you're going to find these 9 American social values running through all of the discussions and debates and implementation of all of those programs. First, we look at Judeo-Christian charity. And this charity, this value, the basic belief is that those in need have a right to help, and society has an obligation to provide for those people who have a need. This is really based on qualities of altruism and love and charity. This sense that we should help those in need, and this is something that is a common American belief system that is common in the American belief system that we need to be of service to people who need our help. We should give to those who have a need, and if this value were implemented truly, if we were being charitable as we give to others, then individuals could seek help without any kind of stigma associated with giving, or rather receiving any help or seeking help. And when that person being charitable, you don't blame the individual for being in a situation that they are. In fact, charity probably requires that you recognize that whatever the person's problems are, really are beyond their capacity to manage. This is the basis of social work and human services ethics, I believe, this notion of charity, but probably is not, well, it is not a part of our practice, really. It is not the ruling element in our practice. For instance, think about who you may feel charitable towards and who you may feel that deserve help. For instance, someone who perhaps has a physical disability and is unable to work because of their physical disability, you may feel more charitable in contributing to that person's needs than you would for somebody who's able-bodied but doesn't have a job for reasons that perhaps you don't know or don't understand, but doesn't have work at this point and isn't able to find work. We tend to blame those individuals who are able-bodied for being out of work, but not blame persons who have some obvious physical limitations for being out of work, and so we feel more charitable to the physically disabled than we do to those not working. That were the Judeo-Christian charity value really applied across our society, we would feel charitable to everybody who is in need, not just select individuals. back in the first George Bush administration, I'm talking about George Bush Sr. in 1988, when George Bush Sr. addressed the Republican National Convention accepting their nomination. He gave his acceptance speech talking about 1,000 points of light in society, that he was pushing for volunteerism. They were looking for ways for the people who were needy to have their needs met through volunteer and charitable contributions. But after the Reagan era, and particularly the idea of big government, was very unpopular, and so the government would not be the agency that would provide for the needs of the needy in his philosophy, but rather the 1,000 points of light, those volunteers out there would take care of the needy in our society. And again, in a perfect world, that is how it would work, but it isn't how it really works. And this American value has been the basis for the federal government in particular, and state government in other ways, shedding responsibility for tending to the needy. Another value is democratic egalitarianism and individualism, and this value holds that all citizens are equal before the law and that individual effort and motivation ensures success. This is the idea that everybody has equal opportunity in our culture, and that if you just work hard enough, you'll get what you want. This is the theme, by the way, when you read The Jungle in the weeks ahead. Jurgis, the primary character in that book, this is what he keeps telling himself: I can succeed if I just work harder. If I just work more, I will be successful. And this is the basic kind of belief about America, and it's what certainly the immigrants that came to this nation 120 years ago believed, that it just took hard work and you could become wealthy and successful in America. But in practice, we don't have equality in America. Groups such as women, persons of color, individuals who are born into poverty and who live in poverty are among those that are denied equal access to opportunity. This belief that hard work is the thing that fashions success really kind of grows out of that frontier mentality in those days, where everybody really had to fend for themselves, and in that environment, in that situation, hard work was the key to success. But we have a tendency to blame the victim. In our society, the economic victims, the ones who aren't doing well, or who are a part of the outgroups in society. Society tends to be exonerated from any sense of responsibility for the needy or those who are not successful because of this idea that everybody can be successful, anybody can be president, we can all climb the ladder of success if we only work hard. The third American value that she talks about is the Protestant work ethic and capitalism. The idea that work for economic gain is the way to success. It's a sign of personal morality, and it's a moral obligation. Now, these are values that arise from the days of the Protestant Reformation, back in the days when Luther was breaking away from the Catholic Church. Luther felt that Martin Luther, in fact, talked about work as being a calling. It's something that was something you were called by God to do. John Calvin, talked about predestination to salvation, that the wealthy individuals, the persons who worked the hardest and who accumulated the most wealth, were the ones who were predestined to go to heaven, and whose souls would be saved. And so religion was blended very much into economics in those days. These are the early days of capitalism as well. While the Protestant Reformation was underway, capitalism also arose at the same time, and the two of them are very closely associated in a lot of theories and beliefs. Some believe that really capitalism grew from the Protestant Reformation itself. This idea that hard work and frugal living, particularly evident in Calvinism, was the way to a moral life. And so if working represented wealth, and if working represented morality, then not working and being poor must have something to do with a lack of morality in this doctrine. And so thus we, because of this doctrine, again, personal fault is attributed to those who are not successful in the economic system. Poverty is believed to be the results of one's laziness or being a degenerate moral person. social Darwinism is a value that is ingrained in American thought processes, but isn't one that most Americans would stand up and associate themselves with loudly and proudly. Now you know about Darwinian theory, which holds that the fittest survive. That evolution tends to weed out the weak in any species, and that the strong survive, and that's good for the species because that means the genes that survive from generation to generation are the strong genes and the healthy genes. The weak genes, the deformed genes, the genes of those individuals in the species that are weak are bred out because they don't live in nature, and so this theory, when you extend that to human beings and society, which is something that happened in the 1800s as the whole scientific movement became popular, and we tried to understand human beings based on scientific theory and things. Social Darwinism seemed to grow from that kind of logically, and the theory is that the economically unfit, that is the poor, have no inherent right to survive. Supporting the poor is against the laws of human economic nature. Remember, capitalism is a system that pure capitalism has no government intervention, has no social welfare programs. It is strictly profit and profit motive, and so individuals who are supposed to be motivated to work hard because of the desire to profit and success. In fact, when capitalism is applied in real life, it doesn't work that way at all, and there will be more about that before too long in this semester. But Darwinian theory would hold that everybody could succeed again, and that those that don't they're the weak in our society, and that it hurts society really to help those who are in need to survive. And again, most Americans wouldn't say this out loud and say they really believe this. I mean, there probably are a few in your lives that do that, but I mean, for the most part, we're not proud of this, but this is a part of our fabric. This is a part of our thinking in this culture. And things like the low levels of public assistance that we provide people who are needy, and the stigmatization that's associated with getting benefits and asking for help, is a good example of the fact that we discourage people from seeking help, and we really, our society will allow them to continue to exist on their own and to wither away. It would be the preferable result. These beliefs directed against the poor, persons of color, other religions that we don't understand or from other cultures, homosexuals, elders, those kinds of things. There is a belief that supporting the poor contributes to their immorality, weakens our society. That is what social Darwinism holds. The fifth value, the new Puritan morality, holds that chastity, honesty, abstinence, proper behavior, sanctity of marriage, patriarchal authority, all are very, very, very valuable things and very sacred in our culture. All of these things, patriarchy, marriage, abstinence, honesty, these kinds of things are the key to understanding this value. This value has really been advanced more vigorously since the 1980s, I believe, during the Reagan administration, when the new right, or the moral majority, as it was called back in those days, televangelists became very popular on television, and some of the religious leaders and the very conservative religious leaders of those days, like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell and others, also became politically active and politically powerful, and this had a big influence on the development of the changes that occurred during the Reagan era, and we'll be hearing about this later in the semester, that really cut back on the gains that were made during the New Deal. And in some respects, those changes are some of the things that the Obama administration has tried to begin to turn the tide to go back to a more helpful era, I think, in the way we address the needs of individuals. But in this this value system, those who live in alternate lifestyles are condemned as sinful. And this includes not only individuals like the ones that you are probably thinking about, like homosexuals, for instance, and things like this, but also extends to individuals who choose to be single all their lives, individuals who choose to not marry but live together and raise children, or raise children alone, for that matter, without a spouse. These kinds of alternate lifestyles that are much more widespread than you might, that are much more commonplace than they might have been 50 years ago, are really kind of put down by this value system, and particularly in a patriarchal society, sexual morality is less important for men than it is for women. And so if you don't fit into this ideal, you do suffer from a stigma as well. Patriarchy, I've been referring to, and is really kind of one of those key values, and really in Western society, and in many respects all of society around the world, and especially in industrialized systems. Patriarchy is the system in which power and authority are vested in men. Other groups, like women and children, are owned by men. This basically by virtue of biology. Men are vested with more privilege, more prestige, more power in the culture. And indeed, most religions legitimize this in their own teachings, that they're God-given spheres of competence for both men and women that are natural. And there are also some scientific evolutionary thinkers who also believe that the division of labor is really good for the species, and those kinds of things. And this is a division of labor which definitely vests males with the more powerful positions. Structures of patriarchy control women, keep them dependent upon men, and keep them dependent upon the system. And this is a problem for not just for women but for men as well. And of course, patriarchy has a lot to do with the fact that most of the people that are on public assistance, and most of the adults receiving public assistance benefits, are women raising children. Not men, but women raising children. And so patriarchy is something that you should become very familiar with and understand. It has a lot to do with the basis for much of the inequality in our society and in our life. White privilege is that pervasive, adamant belief in the superiority of whiteness, and this is very evident in America, I think, in the immigration debates and the fears and concerns that you hear in the press about undocumented or illegal immigrants taking our jobs and ruining our economy and those kinds of things. And Fagan is a writer who's done quite a bit. If you take any courses in diversity, you'll read some articles written by Joel Fagan, and he says in one spot, whiteness is the national norm, and so the white majority's views, practices, and cultures are generally seen as normal. So that implies that the practices and cultures of immigrants and the views of individuals from other racial groups would be considered as outside the norm. And because this is so pervasive, we're virtually, those of us who are Caucasian at least, are really blind to its existence and to its importance in our culture. Peggy McIntosh wrote an article called The Invisible Knapsack of Privilege that I would encourage you to look up on the web. You'll find it on the web, and read, because it talks about the kinds of things that white people get just because they're white, and we don't even recognize the privilege that comes to us because of that. In this age when increasingly our population has an influx of immigration from Latino cultures and so on, this is something that's going to be an issue that needs to be addressed, and we need to be aware of in the years ahead. Marriage in the nuclear family is another one of the 9 values that Day talks about. This is basically the sense that what is normal, what is good, what is proper, is that people should marry and raise a family. And there is this sense that, that they will live happily ever after. This is that fairy tale belief that once you're married, you're going to be happy. This belief says that men and women should marry, but If you're a single male, you don't quite have the stigma against you that single women have. And I find that to be true as a single male myself. I will tell you there still is some stigma even for single males for that matter, because the question is, the question is, I have to go back and fix this, but the question is, I believe that why didn't you ever marry? And you don't ask people who are married, why did you get married, or why aren't you single? But single people are always asked that question, why haven't you married? And that demonstrates clearly that's outside the norm. Likewise, sexuality outside of marriage is frowned upon, and again, more so for women than men. Um, and above all, heterosexuality, and this is really what I think underlies a lot of this insistence upon the institution of marriage, is that heterosexuality is a must. Um, this value really is anti-single, anti-divorce, anti-homosexual, and if you belong in any of those groups, there's some stigma associated with it. And again, it's much worse if you're a female than if you're a male. Um, The ninth American value is the American ideal, and this basically is about lookism. To look or to be different is negative. Um, it's best to be white, or at least white looking, middle class, youthful, slim, reasonably intelligent, good looking, and agile. And to be different from us is to be abnormal or bad. I had a friend who worked for an adoption agency, an agency that did international adoptions from, and I mean not strictly Russian orphans, but orphans from all over the world, from all different cultures. And she did home studies for individuals who wanted to adopt children from other countries. And she studied homes for many different children from many different cultures and things. And I at one point, after my first child had, as I think if you've looked at my bio or heard me talk about myself, I adopted three boys along over the years as a single dad. And um, after my first child had grown up and left, and I was considering the possibility of another adoption, um, I was, let me think, was that when it was? Yeah, no, actually, it was after my second child had grown up and left, and I was thinking about one more adoption. Perhaps I was around 50 or in my early 50s, and was talking to her about the possibility of international adoption as a single male. And one big difference when you adopt privately, of course, is that there's a lot more expense involved in that personally than financially, than there is if you adopt for the state, because the state has many of the things that have to be done already completed by the time you adopt from the state. So I was talking with her about what to expect if I did try to do an international adoption. And one of the things she mentioned to me that was kind of surprising to me is that really the amount of money you spent getting a child from another country into the United States and adopting that child varied according to their race. And she said that the cheapest children, the ones that would cost the less money to adopt, were the ones that were dark skinned, and that the darker the skin, the cheaper the adoption would be. And this wasn't something that she said. She didn't set the price or anything like this. I mean, this wasn't her doing, but it was an observation she made, that she realized in the work that she was doing. And so really, this American idea, this idea of being white looking and all that kind of thing, is really something that's very important in our culture. So those are the 9 American values, and again, keep them in mind as we go through this semester. Keep that list handy, if you would. Print that page out with the 9 American values on them, and keep them handy as we go through the lessons in the weeks ahead. The remainder of this chapter, she looks a little bit at some of the particular problems of inequality in our society, and the first place she starts is that economic inequality, the economic stratification and wealth. That although we believe in egalitarianism, that second value, that the United States is still very much a stratified society. And this means, of course, that we exist in layers of privilege and status and comfort. Classism is a type of prejudice against those who are in lower socioeconomic classes who are presumed to be immoral, and that's why they're there. Basically, that classism is that prejudice against those who are in lower groups than us, and we think that they're less than us. The work ethic, the Protestant work ethic, is the value that underlies stratification. The notion that success equals wealth, and that those who are not successful are believed to have little work ethic and to be relatively immoral. Now, you think about those beliefs and those values, and you look at how our society is structured in 2005, and these figures probably vary a little bit from the text that the edition of the text that you're working with, but nonetheless these remain very valid. And in 2005, the top 5% of the United States population had 50% of income. Now, income is money from working. Okay, so when you go out and you do something, and you have a paycheck coming in, because of that. So the top 5% of our population has 50% of the income. That means most of the money being generated through work is being generated by 1 in 20 people. In 2004, the top 20% owned more than 80% of the nation's wealth. Now, wealth isn't just income. Wealth is also money making money. Savings accounts, bonds, stocks, real estate, all those other kinds of things that I don't even know about, that people, and you and I don't know about, that people make money with, 80% of the nation's wealth is over 80% of the nation's wealth is owned by over 20%, the top 20% of our population, 1 in 5 people. So wealthy people are people who don't work, who don't have to work, so again, you can see that we are definitely a stratified society. There's no question about this. That wealth and income is concentrated, in the top percentage of our population economically. Class stratification is the basis for poverty in America. Those people at the top exist at the top because of things that do and do not happen at the bottom, and we'll be hearing a lot about that in the weeks ahead. They're not just there because they work their way there. They're also there because of what happens to the people at the bottom of the ladder as well. Some more interesting information for you, just some statistics. Again, may not be exactly the same thing that's in the text, but in 2005, the median national income was $46,326. Now, if you remember from your economics class, or if you took your intro to sociology class, or if you took an economics class or a statistics class, the median is not the average. The median is the midpoint. So that if you take all of the incomes in the United States and array them from the highest to the lowest, and you count to the middle, the very middle spot, from the top to the bottom to the very middle, that's the median. So this means that 50% of the incomes of America are above $46,000, and the other 50% are below that amount. So that's the median income, $46,000. The poverty rate in 2005 was 12.6%, 37 million people. That is about 7.5 million families live below the poverty level. And by race, there you can see how it's breaking down, that the highest percentage of those who live in poverty are African American or Native Americans, non-Hispanic whites having the lowest level of poverty by race. And by age, you can also see that while the children under 18 are the largest group of those living in poverty, those are a lot of those the individuals that are receiving public assistance or in public assistance families. The largest percentage of persons who receive public assistance in America are children. Every year of child poverty at the current levels will cost the economy between 36 and 177 billion in future low productivity and employment. So the kinds of things that are denied to children that are in the families now that are receiving public assistance, they're not able to access higher education. They're not able to access the services and the resources that middle and upper income children can access. that fact alone will cost the economy that much more in future years. Poor children, in addition to those things I was just mentioning, they're more likely to have health problems because they don't have health insurance available to them oftentimes, and because they live in substandard housing, or they don't have adequate nutrition, they don't have appropriate health care, those kinds of things. Poor children are more likely to have health problems, to die earlier, to be diagnosed with learning disabilities, or to have behavior disorders. And the risk of a student falling behind in school increases by 2% for each year a child lives in poverty. So poverty is an issue that not only affects the individuals who are living in those homes, but affects all of our society, and is something that needs to be addressed on a societal level. We have one of the highest rates of child poverty among all of the most industrialized nations in the world. And as Robert Greenstein mentioned, the United States cannot continue to compete and prosper in the global arena with more than a fifth of our children, when more than a fifth of our children live in poverty and a third grow up in ignorance. Some of the stratification is the result of institutional discrimination. Now, in the 1950s and the 1960s, most of you weren't alive in those days and won't remember this. A few of us might. There were movements, for equality, the civil rights movement, and the gay rights movement, and the women's liberation movement, and all of those kinds of things, those kinds of ideas out there that pushed for equal treatment under the law. Some of the things that were done to individuals in minority groups, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, women, older people, heterosexuals, those kinds of things, those types of people, the things that were done to those individuals were outright discriminatory. And as these movements in the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s and 80s raised this to the attention of the nation, discrimination, individual acts of discrimination, seem to have fallen down and decreased greatly. It's obvious to us now, I believe, that it's not okay to discriminate against somebody from a different race or a different religion or from a different ethnic group. The individual discrimination is wrong, and we know that. But what has happened since is that the institutions of our society have continued practices which, in effect, create discrimination against those individuals and minority groups as well. And it serves to deny those individuals equal access to the resources that are necessary to succeed in our culture, in our society. Racism, sexism, ageism, heterosexism, otherism, classism all interact to deny equal rights and opportunities to groups because of the hostile attitudes that are reflected in the rules, regulation, procedures of our society's institutions, even if no individual prejudice is involved. This is an area that we will look at throughout the semester in institutional discrimination and how our society and our culture continues to be structured to favor those in the majority and to keep those in these minority groups out of positions of power and opportunity. Went the wrong way there. In the 2008 presidential campaign, Barack Obama talked about our society being post-racial, and he believed that race wouldn't be an issue in the campaign, wasn't anything to consider about because we were beyond considering race when we consider the qualifications of individuals. And so, a good question is whether or not our society is indeed post-racial, and I think we've all come to recognize that we're not. Individual acts of discrimination have been reduced significantly, but they're not totally absent, even though they are against the law. Institutional racism is more insidious and is much more woven into the fabric of our society. And it's very easy to deny because nobody in particular is responsible for it. No one individual designed this or wrote this in there, but it continues to exist. And this is where much of our modern day oppression continues to exist. And so, with that, obviously, this was the end of the first chapter, and there will be two more chapters to cover in this week's lecture. So just continue on, but and take a break and get yourself a cup of coffee, and come on back and sit down for chapter 2. Thank you.